So I would say we started up, Jeff. Are you ready?
Sounds good to me.
Awesome.
Ready as always.
People are joining, but that's what you get for being late.
Yep, and they can go back and watch the recording later if they want.
For the first words, yes. So Jeff, just making sure, am I showing you the Tech Talk series PowerPoint slide?
Yes, look good.
Perfect. Because Zoom stopped telling me that I did so. Anyways, everybody, welcome to the Tech Talk series episode. Where are we? 5?
Yes, I think this is the 5th one. That's correct.
Yeah. So very happy to see people in the audience, and let's see what we are about to do today. First off, it's you and me again, Jeff.
Yep, I'm still in Cincinnati. I'm still a technology evangelist with IGEL, so that hasn't changed.
And actually the same for me, but I'm not in Cincinnati. I'm based in Sweden, Vänersborg, a very small city close to the West Coast. And also tech evangelist, as I usually shorten it. What happened a week ago, Jeff? What did we do?
Well, a week ago, we focused on configuring the RX420 IGEL edition, configuring Citrix. We really, the device is designed and works quite well with Citrix. We get all the support for Citrix with the Workspace Hub and self-service and the Workspace app is all there. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how to configure Citrix. Last week, we talked about some of the advanced settings. And we'll go back and review those, I think, real quick. And then today, and we talked about, well, I don't know if you want to share your screen real quick. Let's do a quick look at what we did talk about last week.
Oh, sure. I will just see if I can get my RX420 to share on the screen.
Perfect.
And I think I do.
Yeah, if we go ahead and launch, I think you have setup running here. What we talked about last week were the Citrix global settings. There was a big focus here on the fact that we could go down and we could select under Window, for example. We talked about when you click on Window under global settings, we talked about how we can control the monitor and where sessions launch on different displays, whether or not we want to stretch the desktop across the entire landscape of displays that you might have. We can control all of that. We talked also about device mapping or optimizations. We talked about things like drive mapping and accessing block devices. We were just talking, remember we were talking about the fact that, USB redirection as a long USB extension cord, if you will, is not ideal for accessing the devices that are at the end of a USB cord, if you will. So storage, a block device. We have optimizations for accessing block devices, Citrix does, and it's important to focus on those. We talked about drive and COM and printer mapping.
Jeff,
yes, go ahead.
Put me on the spot here in terms of the USB mapping, so the extension cord. What would you say is the required maximum latency to actually USB redirect a device successfully?
Oh, I don't know. It's less than 10 milliseconds, isn't it?
I think it's actually the double, 20 milliseconds. But
20?
anyways, it's you have to have a quite low latency to actually do this successfully.
Yeah. And even if you can, again, some of these devices, it's just better to not USB redirect them. I mean, we don't want to USB redirect a printer. I mean, we have all sorts of printer support. We have printer tools local in IGEL. So we talked about these various features. We talked about the native USB redirection. And I think one of the items that we talked about was that you and I and most of the people from IGEL, or those that have worked with IGEL for a while or Citrix for a while, recognize that we might turn on USB redirection. We have to turn it on for IGEL, but we like to then control things by vendor ID and product ID or the vid and the PID, because it allows us very granular access and control over the devices that are plugged into an IGEL device and what we would allow. And using the UMS console, we can create a policy around these and push them down through the UMS. So
it almost seems like you have been listening to my teachings.
I try. So we also talked about the HTX multimedia. And importantly, I think we talked about the webcam redirection and the fact that we have a feature now here to when we talk about webcam redirection, we can set an automatic configuration, which is a nice feature. And then you can set a resolution grade. And we'll come back to that in a minute here. But that's a good segue into what we're going to talk about today. So, but yeah, that's pretty much what we covered last week, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we say, the pretty piece of the configuration of Citrix. And the pretty piece is kind of like what you can see in the regular GUI when you're building a profile.
Yes, the people who like to point and click.
Yeah. But Jeff, I know that there are so many other things within Citrix Workspace app to control.
Correct.
And this is what we are going to look at now, right?
Yes, and so this will be part 3 of Citrix configuration, and this is the uber advanced or ultra advanced settings that are available to us. But they're not on these pretty screens. So where do we find them? Well,
I would say we have a thing that is called the registry.
Ah, yes, the registry, like Microsoft's registry.
Yeah, exactly the same.
It is exactly the same?
Not really.
Well,
I would say it's quite different.
Yeah, that would scare me.
Yep.
So if you were in an IGEL setup, whether you're working with a profile on the UMS or you're directly on the device and you go into our system area, this is where you access the IGEL registry. And what exactly is our registry, would you say?
So I would say it's our way of collecting the pretty pages configurations and the all the pieces that didn't actually make it to the pretty pages.
Yeah, I go back to yeah, I mean it is the settings. It is a look into all of the configuration elements that are available on an IGEL device.
Yes.
And they're somewhat specific to firmware versions. So when we provide a firmware update, it may be that there are new features added, and always these new features will be available in the registry before we see them on a pretty screen, because this is essentially where we define all of our attributes or all the parameters.
Exactly, and that is also very important, because there might be a release of an IGEL firmware that actually requires the UMS to have an update before the pretty screens when you're building profiles in the UMS needs to be updated on the server side. But if you connect the device to the UMS with a newer firmware, you will always be able to set all those settings in the new firmware using the registry anyways. You just need to figure out where they are located. Correct,
which is a good way to maybe talk about this. So when you go into this registry, we've broken it out into various sections. I don't want to call them hives. We'll call them sections here. And as we look inside here under this list of registry entries, we see a section called ICA. And since we're talking about Citrix, that might be a place that we're going to look today. So if we expand that, we see there are a number of sections under ICA. So for example, if you click on active version, we talked about last week about the fact that we provide multiple versions of the Workspace app in IGEL OS, and you can pick the versions that you want to use. Interestingly enough, this happens to be a setting that is back on the pretty pages. We don't need, if you go back up under Citrix, you go to Citrix the setting is here. If we make the change here just for fun, if you go to 2104 and you change it to say 2010, and then you go back into the registry section down below, and we see it's changed to 2010 here. So it's just two ways to get to the same parameter. I do like people to, one of the things I think is interesting is at the top here, there's a little section that says ICA.active version. So that's the actual name of our entry, you know, in terms of when we want to talk about setting the client version, we're going to set internally, we'll be setting, we might run set param space ICA.active version space, and then 20.10.0. Exactly. And I could do that at a command line. If I had command line access, I could set that version locally on the device using that command. So if you really want to be hardcore, you don't even need the management, the UMS or the setup utility. You can do it all at the command line.
Exactly. So Jeff, from my understanding, we can actually within the printer pages see the location of the item within the registry. Everything that exists. I think it's a good exercise.
It is an interesting one. You have to do this on a device, but yeah, if you, what is it, Control F2, I think.
I think it's actually in the UMS nowadays too.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
There you go. I learned something new today. So if you were to press that now, it would actually pop that variable, the list of configurable options in here, correct?
I'm just trying to figure out the sequence.
I thought it was Control F2.
Control F2. Yeah, it was. I was adding alternate.
So, and in here we can see some of the items that are settable. So, for example, the ICA default active version or the ICA active version, you know, is settable right here. So, same entry, two places. But let's go back to that registry real quick, and let's not. Going to make sure we stay more on time. So we get down in here and we have all these options. Okay, if you get into and you've been around for a long time, Citrix for a while, there are a lot of configuration files. There's the all regions any file. There's a WF client.ini file. There's a module.ini file. There's all these bits and pieces. And in the past, when you might need to go into a registry or go edit a file to set some of these, these are available. We've made these available through IGEL setup and by extension through the UMS. So like we get into things like the all regions area, where is things like that Citrix connection bar that sits at the top of the screen that drops down. If we wanted to turn that on or off, we could turn that on. Okay, and that might become the default there. So and of course, all regions is also more of a policy file, as I recall, in terms of what you have access to and what you can turn on or off. So, but point being is we have these options inside here. Okay. If we close up all regions, we also have some settings around the authentication manager. So we can go inside here and we have the authentication manager enabled. It's interesting. You click on this. We were talking about the authenticated tokens, which there's a feature that Citrix is working on called service continuity.
Yep.
Which we're working to integrate into IGEL OS. The concept being you as a user connect and get authenticated. Your resources, the resources you connect to, are accessible, as I understand it, outside of the Citrix farm and the broker. In fact, once I've been authenticated, I can have this series of tokens on my device. And if my infrastructure, my authentication infrastructure is gone and not accessible anymore because it's in the cloud and for whatever reason, I have all that I need to connect to my resources. So I think this is where this comes in. It's a new feature that's being implemented. And so we find it in the registry because we're working with it, and maybe it's not completely done yet. So sometimes you'll see that kind of information down there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you will find all the interesting features. Authman, is something else to talk about Authman in specific, or should we walk?
You know, one of the things I will note is throughout this registry, you'll find references to logging. So we have a logging mode, we have trace enabled, and some other pieces here. So sometimes if you're working with Citrix or working with support, it may be that you need to go in and turn on or configure some of the logging features because you want to capture logs and provide them to Citrix or provide them to IGEL support. So, so we can go in and we can set that as well. In here, we talked earlier about the webcam. You know, very interesting point as people use, because we have things like Teams and Cisco WebEx and you know, because we don't necessarily have offloading for the webcam on the on the ARM platforms. This is interesting, but in our experience, the webcam optimization is pretty good.
Yeah, it is, and actually pretty stable too. And
yeah.
So the automatic webcam the configuration tool that IGEL has added to the environment of the RX 420 and also on the x86 side now will, as we talked earlier about, allow you to automatically configure the webcam based on the characteristics of the webcam. But there is actually a possibility to override one thing at least. Because you could set a different level of resolution grade on the webcam, but a hidden thing here in the registry is the frame rate, which will default to 15.
Right.
So 15 frames per second. It's okay for a webcam feed.
But boy, when we play with this, we pushed it up to 25.
Yeah.
And then when we're using the webcam, what we found is that the Citrix optimizations, HDX optimizations for the webcam are pretty good.
Yeah.
And yes, you know, we're using more processing on the server side and some other things, but it makes it a really good experience. So
going from, I did a quick check when we were working yesterday evening, Jeff, and I think going from 15 to 25 frames per second did about 2-3% CPU.
Okay.
Is it my audio that is bad, or is it yours?
I don't know. What's it sound like to you?
Because I hear feedback.
Oh no.
Or echo. Let's see if we can get Jeff to fix this.
Back.
Yep.
You there?
Yes.
Is the echo gone?
Yes.
It's a slight zoom. We're still trying to get to the bottom of that one, but on occasion, it might be because I have literally 5 microphones hooked up to my UD7. And it's feeding back into something.
Yeah.
Anyway, by the way, we did have a question here, and it was a really good question. You know, does IGEL provide any detailed documentation around each of these options? The short answer would be no. Now, I say that it's a little bit. These are options for the Workspace app. So the fact that we set this frame rate here, or if you go down a little further to module and you expand module here, we can go into things like, as a case in point, maybe under the audio section here, you have audio latency control enabled. I think it's the 4th or 5th one in the list. Okay.
Yep.
So audio latency control enabled is an important option. Okay, because it helps improve and make that audio a little more consistent over a high latency connection. This is a setting that Citrix has added to the Workspace app, okay, so that you could address specific situations. All of these settings are described in pretty good detail in the OEM and the Workspace app technical documentation for OEMs, which is on the Citrix website. I'll try to grab the link here.
It's publicly available, so.
Yeah. And that's the place to go, because you can go and you can read about every single one of these items, what specifically they do. Because what happens when you pop above there, we sometimes turn this on, but now we have buffer size and latency correction intervals. So we can get granular in terms of at what point, are we going to step in at 300 milliseconds? That's a lot of latency. Maybe this gets pushed down to 150. So it allows you to change that. Then you can change your buffer size. There's just a ton here. What sticks out in your mind? UDP audio for one.
Yeah. This is the way to enable UDP audio.
Right.
Is that on the pre pages?
Ew, no.
I don't recall.
No, it's not. In fact, a lot of these settings in here, okay, are not going to be there. So, the high throughput window size. Okay, I have no idea what that one is. But it has to, I think it has to, I have no idea what this does. But this would be a time I might go to the documentation and read about this. But
it's more of if you figure out by Googling and getting hints that you should do whatever it might be. This is the way to do this configuration without altering the files manually.
Yeah, I've had times where Citrix has even said, "Hey, is there a way to set this?" And of course there is, because they added it. But what we've done through the registry is we're exposing all of those options. You don't have to step out. You don't have to use an editor. You don't have to go edit these configuration files. Okay, under Citrix ICA client, for example, you can just make the changes in here. Okay, and then they'll show up inside those various configuration files. So WF client, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. If we go forward to the WF client, this is where we have all the good stuff. Yeah.
I mean, some of these, like the hotkey overrides, I mean, we have a pretty screen for that, although I don't know too many people who override these keys. But yeah, I mean, look at the SOX proxy and yeah, some of the keyboard layout. I mean, some of these are pretty screens. What else we have? Oh, the mouse middle click. That's always been one of my favorites. So look at the options around it. The mouse double click. How accurate do you have to be in terms of putting it in there? The mouse mapping. I forget when that option showed up. It was years ago. We could rearrange those mouse buttons if somebody needed to do that. So if you have one of like those mice that have all those buttons on them and stuff, I think you could make those changes in here. There's a mouse middle click in here. A lot of people who work with Linux, one of the cool options in Linux is the fact that the middle mouse button, or if you depress the scroll wheel, that's the paste key in Linux. So if I highlight something and then go to another window and press the middle mouse, it'll paste whatever I highlighted. That's really useful, but it doesn't mean anything in Windows. So one of the options here is to enable that mouse middle click. So it passes that through to the Citrix environment, and the middle click gives you the little Microsoft tool for browsing and some other things.
Yep.
Relative mouse, remember all the relative mouse functions? That showed up 20 years ago. Yeah. So again, and then the TWI focus options. I remember those. Sometimes we had Java applications where the windows weren't placed properly when in my Citrix sessions. So then lo and behold, you dig in and you find out, well, guess what? Citrix gave us options to deal with that.
Jeff, when do you do relative mouse?
I have no idea. I
usually only do it when doing gaming.
Oh,
because then the mouse pointer will not leave the edges of the screen. Yeah. Otherwise, if you are in a 3D environment, so to speak, and you move the mouse to the extents, it will stop. So it will stop turning. But if you do relative mouse, it will just continue to rotate or whatever you're doing. And I think there is a business perspective to this too.
Very good. Yep. So, I mean, going down here, there's all those little details around speed, screen. Oh my gosh. I mean, just a lot of features, okay, that someone may need to set. Citrix makes recommendations about what should be the default settings, okay? And so we'll go ahead and those will become the default settings inside of IGEL, but they're all here for you to choose and pick and choose and control. Splash delay, always an interesting one. You know, we put those splashes up there that sometimes are there just for cosmetic purposes. It's kind of like a dial tone on a digital phone. When they play a dial tone, it doesn't do anything. It's just there to satisfy you. So sometimes the icons that pop up on those screens are simply there to give you something to look at for a while.
Yeah. Exactly.
Again, down. And the important thing I think we wanted to share with people here as we're running up towards the end of our time is that these exist. And if something isn't behaving properly and you go look inside, say, the Citrix community, or if you go to the IGEL community, or you're working with Citrix, you know, or you're working with your partners, know that these are here. And if you needed to set them, okay, you can work your way down inside here and activate one of these settings if need be.
It allows you to do the extra little pieces of tweaking.
Exactly. And I think, you know, the other piece about this, because it's configurable in IGEL setup, because it's configurable in this way, every one of these settings could be a policy or a profile in the IGEL management system. And that does give you a lot of control, the ability to sit there and say, okay, we want to enable, you know, UDP audio, or want to enable, well, by the way, UDP audio, keep in mind, that only works and that doesn't work through a NetScaler or an ADC, I suppose. Somebody told me that there's going to be an update to the ADC that'll let you do UDP audio, but I don't know about that at the moment.
Okay.
The real-time monitor performance settings. That's an interesting option.
It is.
If you've never seen this, the first time we saw this had to be about 7-8 years ago, when we realized that the workspace app for Linux, or the receiver at the time, okay, allows you to make a connection, and then up at the right-hand corner, it'll show you all sorts of statistics around your session in terms of what goes on. It's cool. It's nice to have in the corner, but it also lays over top of everything, so it can get in the way. But if you've never gone in and set this, it's quite interesting to go configure the real-time performance setting and then make a connection and see what's going on. So I'll share that out here. Again, something that's available in the registry that you're not going to see on the pretty screens.
Yep. And this will give you a lot of details about the session. So, okay, Jeff, I think that we are currently on time, and I do think we covered based on the plan.
Yeah, I think we did. And I was just trying to find, I know if you go look at if you go right to Citrix's documentation, it's all gone to online documentation, but it was the OEM reference guide for this. Well, I'm looking for Citrix receiver for Linux OEM's reference guide here, but it is now all online. It's all been moved to HTML, so you can navigate through that. But take a look at that. I think maybe we do our next session. We'll get the link and we'll share that with everybody during our next session, which, by the way, what are we going to do during our next session?
I would say that a workspace hub should have a spot.
Yes, we could do a little bit about the workspace hub.
Yeah.
We could talk about what you can do to brand your device.
Yeah, sure.
I know the wallpaper you're showing up here is a lot different than the wallpaper I have on my RX 420.
Yeah.
We can do an awful lot to work that up. The other thing I want to talk about is inside here is the update service that we've implemented in this device, and we can talk about those details as well. So maybe
Which
we
makes
spend some
good
time
sense.
on the hub.
Which makes good sense because it's getting more and more closer to your release of the next public firmware. So
Correct. And once that's available, we'll post that.
Mhm.
And if your device isn't managed and is basically, and you've seen the message pop up saying there's new firmware, one day here in the next couple of weeks, you'll see a message that says 11.01.120 is available. And you can choose to download that, and that you'll see that message when the device boots. But there's a whole lot of configuration around, should the device check automatically? How often should it check? Should it update automatically? Should I prompt the user? A bunch of stuff. And maybe we'll pay homage to those settings and how those work.
Yeah, because you can actually use this service to update from your own repository if you want to.
Yes,
It's also
absolutely.
Yeah. Work for WFX scenarios. Amazing. Very good stuff.
All right.
Sounds good. I think that we have covered all the I will say answer live to the detailed documentation. There is no other questions in the Q&A, and the chat seems to be calm. So by that, Jeff, I think we should say see you guys in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. As always, Fredrick, it's good talking with you.
Same to you, Jeff. Definitely a pleasure.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.